time. Hey, we're on air. That was even really fast. Nice work, YouTube. Today is May 31st. This is a meeting to check in on development tasks for Backdrop CMS. This is our new dog, Callie. She's sometimes more active than this, but she makes a good meeting dog. It's great. Let's see. So we also mentioned in the last meeting, we're going to be working on improving module themes and layout selection pages on backdropcms.org. That hasn't made any progress yet, but now that 1.10.1 is out, we should be able to focus on that. The forum site, .com, made some changes too that have not been deployed yet. So that's my goal for today, is to get those up there. Backdrop CMS, a lot of activity recently. So I'm just going to turn this over to you, Nate. Talk about the project.
Oh, okay. Well, as YouTube viewers may not be aware, last week we didn't have a meeting because Google Hangouts was having technical difficulties. But last week we did discuss, we still had the meeting, even though it wasn't recorded, and discussed potential functionality and features that we should include in the 1.11 release, which would be the next release. Looks like that's not right. It's not May 15th. It'll be September 15th, 2018. But before we go into that, let's talk about the maintenance releases for 1.10, which is the current minor release of Backdrop, and it's the one that if you go to backdropcms.org, it's what you would download today as the current stable release. Just yesterday, we released 1.10.1, which is the first bug fix release for 1.10. And we fixed a boatload of issues kind of in that release, only a few of which were actual regressions introduced in 1.10. We did some tidying up around the way the messages are displayed when you schedule content for publishing. We fixed some issues with the menu translation. We improved version checking. It looked like we had some thoughts that maybe the 1.10 release, because it went over the singular number 9, that some of our version comparisons might be causing problems, that string comparison of like 10 versus 9 might end up being higher than 10, which of course is not correct. But it actually turned out all of our version checking was completely fine. But there was just some unrelated version checking issues that have been in Drupal and in Backdrop since forever, regarding dev versions, beta versions, alpha versions, etc. And so we fixed all of those problems, which is great. Like we thought that it was the number 10 related, but just turned out it was an unrelated problem that that we handled at the same time. So that's been great. And so 1.10.1 is now out. And we also pushed that to all of the upstreams. So if you run Pantheon site, I think platform got updated as well, or use the Docker image. All of them are now on the 1.10 release. So you can update all of your sites to 1.10 with confidence. For the next bug fix release, looks like we've got 2 issues in the agenda here. This issue 2904, database credentials used to not be URL encoded, and now they are URL encoded, really only applies to people that have used special characters in their database password. This has been an issue since the release of 1.9. So unfortunately, it's been plaguing us for the last 4 months. We have a fix in the issue there that will remedy that problem temporarily, and we have a plan for making it so that that's actually mergeable. The thing that's holding it up is we need a status report indication. If the password is being attempted to be fixed automatically, we need to throw a status report error there. But it would continue to work. We would just throw a warning to the user saying, hey, you need to update your settings.php file. So that still needs a little bit of work, but it's coming along. It's kind of dropped off in importance too. Like it was really important when 1.9 first came out because there were a couple of sites out there that actually broke when updating, but now it's been 4 months. So updating users is the biggest problem, and those users have probably updated by this point, or they've managed to update their files by now. So a lesser important thing probably now at this point. Let's see. There's also this issue, one of the oldest issues in the Backdrop issue queue, issue number 37, which is a UX improvement for making it so that modules can be tagged. This is a feature that almost got into 1.10, but got bumped kind of at the last, well, not at the last minute, but I was basically being stubborn in that issue. And so we didn't reach a consensus on implementation there. But now we've kind of de-scoped that issue slightly to make it so that the implementation is a lot lower impact than the previous iterations of it. And so the idea here is simply that we make it so that modules have the ability to have tags and .info files, but the user interface stays exactly the same. So we can start using tags to improve the searchability, and also to start using it on backdropcms.org for searches through the installer module. So that enables functionality, even though the user experience will remain mostly the same. I know that this is tagged in the next bug fix release. I'm a little bit iffy about whether or not that would be like low impact or not. But we can discuss that probably in issue queue. Or if you guys have feedback here about whether or not you think that that's appropriate for a bug fix release or not.
Well, the reason it got bumped from 110 is because we were told it would be okay as a bug fix release.
You're saying the reason why you compromised on it was because it would be okay?
No, the reason that it got bumped in the first place, well, maybe not the reason, but you said it's okay if we bump it because we can do this in a bug fix release. Now you're like, I'm not sure we should do this in a bug fix release.
Did I say that?
Yeah.
I'm sure I said that. Did I say it during a meeting? Because I don't think it's in the issue.
No, I think you said it in the issue.
This is just allowing the tags?
Mm-hmm.
So the significant change, I think, is the fact that we're changing all the info files. What we're actually doing on the modules page, like extending the JavaScript for the search, I don't think is going to be super impactful.
Are we changing the info files, or are we just changing the ability for the info files?
We would add tags to all the core module info files. I mean, info file isn't also super impactful.
Yeah.
It would be like 2 or 3 lines per info file of a tag.
Yeah, it seems fine for a bug fix release, since it is just sort of a back-end thing without any feature changes and doesn't actually change any functionality.
Yeah, the only functionality that would change is that when you type in the search box on the modules page, it would now search the tags in addition to the module name and description and package grouping.
We could also do that later and just have the info files for now, and then have the ability to search those tags next release or something. I don't know.
You want me to split that into 2 issues, Nate?
We could.
I don't.
Or
Yeah,
we
I
could
think
do both.
it's already all together at the moment. I would say we've already de-scoped a lot of functionality. I would say it's fine to keep the search improvement with it.
Why don't I write a pull request and you can take a look at the actual finished code changes and see how you feel about it, whether you think it's going to be disruptive or not.
Yeah, there we go.
One of the questions too is like, is this something we want to brag about? Like, because if we do it in a release, we can brag that we've done it. If we do it during a bug fix, we have to sort of minimize the impact.
Yeah.
So the question is, do you want to minimize that we're doing this, or celebrate that?
Yeah, that's an awesome observation, Mike. You're totally right that if we do it in a bug fix release, like, we don't really tout things that we add in bug fix releases because it's not supposed to be adding new functionality, really. which I don't know. That seems kind of like that kind of underscores the like maybe we shouldn't be doing that if we're not telling people. Like that seems to make it even worse.
I mean, I would be fine adding the ability to put these in the other thing we could do is, yeah, I don't know. Either way, it's kind of a little change. I think the bigger thing that we're going to brag about is like when it's actually searchable on the website.
Yeah.
So independent of a release, when we actually get it searching on B.0, then that's when we can sort of announce it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Well, in any case, yeah, re-rolling the pull request seems like a good thing to do, regardless of when it gets merged in.
Okay.
It would be good to have it ready. My comment, I did find it, was actually that I was saying that we didn't make it in feature freeze, but we still had the 2 weeks before we did the release, and we could still implement it there before the release. So that's what I was saying there, or had written down. Anyway, for 1.10.2, 1.10.2 is the next bug fix release. We don't have any other features that have, or sorry, issues that have a focus for the next bug fix release. There's looks like 21 open issues right now that are slated for the next bug fix release. Most of those have pull requests. Looks like all of them have been reviewed and all of them needs work at the moment. So if you're looking for bugs to fix, high priority items are in the 1.10.2 milestone, but none of them are like high enough that we're going to pull them out and mention them in this meeting. So yeah, the state of backdrop is stable. Okay, let's talk about 1.11. 1.11 is the next minor release. That is the next release that includes features, and that will be September 15th, 2018. Like I said, we had a little meeting discussing what areas of focus we have for the next release, though these things are not set in stone. We have a couple of ideas here that we're looking to get implemented. Let's see. So I'm going to talk about these two at the same time. Where is updates? Okay. Here, it looks hard. Yeah, I'm going to start with this one, which is a little bit easier. So the first one I want to talk about is issue 3105, which is a pull request that makes it so that we can make it so that Backdrop Core can update itself through the user interface. And this is not as ambitious as it might sound. It uses the existing update mechanism that we currently use for updating modules. It just reapplies that exact same approach to updating core itself. So the pull request is up there already. It is in a needs review state, and it actually seems like it already works, although testing it is somewhat difficult because you have to mock up pretending to be a previous release and then updating to a newer release. And then once you've updated, the self-updating ability disappears because the self-updating ability isn't in the new release. So it's a little bit hard to test out functionally, but it sure seems like it is all fully capable. And that is part of a larger issue 2018, which is the meta issue for automatic updates, which is where we would like to get as soon as possible. It's actually been an open issue for quite a while, but this is kind of the first step, which is just allowing core updates at all, allowing Backdrop to update itself. And so it looks really good. More eyes that we can get on that, the better. And then I think that we should probably, barring any large issues, get that merged into the 1.x branch for 1.11 kind of as soon as possible. I think that would make testing and functionality a lot easier for people. So that one's very exciting. And then from there, we'll proceed to other possible automatic update capabilities. Also related to automatic updates is this next issue, 2125, which is regarding the profiles directory. So the profiles directory where install profiles live is still in the root of the Backdrop installation instead of being under the core directory, as the core self-updater only replaces the core directory. And actually, most of our instructions regarding updating Backdrop actually also only say that you need to update the core directory. Moving the profiles directory underneath core would simplify the update process and make it so that profiles are included in the automatic updates eventually. So that's another issue that is kind of an infrastructure task that would be good to handle. The issue is 2125, and there is a pull request there.
Also needs to provide an empty profiles directory in the root for anyone who is running their own profiles, like the sites directory.
The pull request doesn't do that. And considering profiles are really kind of exceptional, like I don't think
they are, but we have a lot of people who are evaluating Backdrop right now who use profiles heavily. So I wouldn't want to break our existing functionality just to put them in there. Like, as long as the system still searches for the profiles in both locations, just core, that's probably fine. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and the current pull request, what it does is it updates the README file that is in the core profiles directory to say something different. It says, like, if you want to run your own profiles, create a directory called profiles in the root, and then place your profiles there. So it does have some documentation updates, but unlike the modules and themes directory, which are there but empty, it doesn't create one out of the box because it's kind of unlikely for a normal user to create their own install profile.
Okay. Yep, that's fine. That sounds good, actually.
Was there somebody else that was saying something there? No?
Well, I think we have to have a larger discussion about install profiles, and maybe that might inform it, but we can do that later.
Yeah.
On the agenda.
Okay. Now let's get into some of the more complicated things. So also related to all of our abilities to do updates and auto updates is this issue, which has to do with collecting better statistics about what users are doing with their Backdrop websites. And that's issue 285. Issue 285 recently got an excellent update, looks like by BW Panda, actually not super recent, last month, regarding how Joomla accomplishes this. And the basic concept is we want to collect anonymized statistics about what people are using their Backdrop websites for, including things like, I don't know, like whether or not they use revisions or how many content types they might have, or statistics that would help us determine what functionality is common and what is less common. And so we can make product decisions based upon the statistics. I think
that issue is going to be like two or three different parts, where number one, we need to figure out what information we want to track. Number two, we're going to have to set up the project module to be able to support this kind of information. And then number three, we're going to have to set up Backdrop itself to be able to submit the information to the project module.
Yep. Exactly, all of those things. And we haven't, started any implementation here, so the door is kind of wide open as to how we approach it. It seems kind of obvious that Backdrop installs already communicate with backdropcms.org for updates, and that we could piggyback on top of that same request when a Backdrop site checks for updates, that we could also record information, not just about what versions of modules they have installed, but also about how those modules are being installed or how those modules are being used.
Well, it doesn't.
But we can also separate that. Yeah.
It doesn't even currently report which modules. It only reports which projects.
Yes, that's
so correct. I think like the first step would be, let's see if we can add module data in addition to project data, because I think that would be pretty easy. And then we've got to figure out, okay, do we need to track specific variable values, and then how do we communicate to to the people who are running the sites what's being transmitted and give them an option to opt out. I recently went through that process of updating our privacy policy and letting everybody know like which information is transmitted. So I think we just need to be really careful, especially now that everybody's thinking about it, to be really transparent about.
It seems weird to discuss collecting more information right now since everyone is trying to collect less. But yeah, it seems like this sort of anonymous usage statistics that we're looking for shouldn't run afoul of any privacy laws since we're not transmitting any personal data.
Yeah. But I think it would be really great if we could like itemize, like this is the data we're collecting from you. It's which modules, which versions, whether they're enabled or not. And then if we want any other information, like which languages you have installed for translation or whatever, we specifically put that into a list and say, this is what we're trying to figure out. And then we already have a paragraph about why we want this information in terms of making decisions about future of the product and stuff. So I just think that as we make these changes to the software, we need to also be really clear about updating that documentation. About
and how do we notify them when we change it? Like, you know, when we add an additional statistic, like how are we going to notify the users that we're collecting more information about them?
That's a good question. Especially if we're using the existing system, we wouldn't want there to be like a separate module to turn on, but maybe we could have a setting somewhere that was on by default.
Setting that says like, you know, send anonymous usage statistics to, you know, but like, you know, if we enumerate all the things that we're collecting and then we add another thing, then it's kind of invalidating their decision when they clicked on the checkbox to begin with. So it's like, either we should keep it sort of general about the information we're collecting, so we're not, you know, being too specific and then changing it, or we need to figure out some way to let them know that what's being changed.
Yeah, I think what I would like to see is the concept of having the central server, backdropcms.org, determine what is collected is too dangerous. I think that the decisions about what, or the capabilities about what information is sent should be in the software itself, which means that in order to collect new information, they would have to update to a newer version of Backdrop. And at that time, we could give them a status report update saying the information we collect has changed. And then you would like go to a button and click like OK or something, or go to a page and then click OK. To basically like say it's fine.
Revalidate.
This. Yeah, exactly. So every time we make a change to what we're collecting, that requires the software change. And I think that would be the safest way to go about it.
And if they don't click OK on that button, then check the box for submitting anonymized data.
Or, well, we could keep track of what they, like the big long list of everything that they have approved to send us, and then continue sending what they have approved until they check the box that say, I approve the new things, and then we add those to the list of approved items.
So right now there's not a list though, it's just send, don't send.
Yes, exactly. And we wouldn't even like, I don't think that we would present them a checkbox for every single one. It would be kind of like, these are the things that have been approved and we store them internally. And every time you approve it, it like includes all of the current items.
Is this something we might want to run by the lawyers at the Software Freedom Conservancy?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Get their
into trouble.
So cute.
Yeah, you're awake. Doing it?
Conceptually, I was thinking about this as being like a, you know, it would probably be separated by module, but every individual thing that we track would just have some kind of identifier, like let's say system module collected PHP version. So it'd be like system:PHP version, and that would be like the unique key for that particular piece of data that we collect. And then each module could, in theory, provide options of data to collect. I don't know. Let's keep thinking about it. Anyway, like I said, we haven't quite decided where we're heading with 1.11 yet, and so this is kind of still in the vague area, despite the fact that this issue has been open for a long time. Like, yeah, there's still a lot of thinking that needs to go into it. Let's continue on. So next issue to discuss is issue 3062, which is all about the Node preview. I haven't had time to read over this, but Jen, it looks like you have. Can you summarize for us what is being pursued here?
Yeah, so I think I haven't looked at it recently, but I think where we left it is Doc Beaumont was able to take the Node preview work from Drupal 8 and apply it to Backdrop, and it accounted for everything except for layouts, which Drupal 8 doesn't have in the same way that we do. And so I thought it looked fantastic and said, if we can get this work for layouts, I totally think we should include it. I think it would be a little problematic to have a preview without layouts because the block placement not being in the right place is not going to make it a true preview. And so there are a couple of different approaches on how to handle block placement with layouts without actually having a node, because the way layouts work right now is they need to have a node context in order to be able to determine which layout to use. And so one of the recommendations was essentially when you hit the preview button, you would create a draft. So sort of save a draft, and then you'd have a node saved that you'd be viewing. And that way it would be very true to the system using what it would use when it's saved. And then you could have like a continue editing button where, I don't know if we have this already, but we talked about when we put CTools in core using the temp store for node drafts. So something like that could work for that, or we could just save it as like a unpublished revision. We talked about doing that. We talked about like creating a fake node object and trying to somehow shove it in as a context object that wasn't a true node. But last I read, Doc Beaumont said he was going to try a couple of things and see what he thought worked best.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm looking at the pull request now. I haven't tried it out. We do have temp store functionality in core. It's used by views and layouts, and it's this sort of thing is exactly what it's intended to be used for. It looks like what happens is you click the preview button, and it basically saves the node, but it saves it into temp store instead of into like into the node table. So it's kind of it's kind of mind bending that the node would exist temporarily, but not actually be in the database anywhere.
But that's what you want, though, right?
Yeah. Huh. Yeah, very, very interesting. I had expected this to kind of save the node as a draft.
We talked about that too.
Write it to the table, but this is not saving it anywhere. It's literally, well, I mean, it's in temp store, but temp store is per its name temporary. It has an expiration date where it's like if you were not to edit your content for like a day or 3 days, the module gets to determine how long it lasts. Then it gets dropped from the database, kind of cleaned up.
But it wasn't in the database.
No, it's in the temp store. The temp store is the database.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's not.
In the node table.
Yeah, it's not in the node table. Huh. Wow. Well, anyway, that looks really fascinating. Yeah, it's currently in a needs work state, but the implementation, just browsing over it real briefly, it looks pretty good. No tests yet that, of course, would need to be added. But yeah, that's pretty exciting. The reason why we removed Node Preview, of course, is because the preview was really terrible. And so we got rid of that concept from Drupal 7 because it was not actually very useful. Yeah. It's so confusing. Like, was it still doing the like thing at the top of the page in the wrong theme?
Yeah.
Boy, that was the worst. So anyway, that looks really promising. Issue 3062, great. Needs some work. Needs some more feedback as well. More eyeballs on that would definitely be appreciated. So Jen, there's the next issue in the agenda is adding save draft to core, and it just has question marks here. Is there an issue for that?
So I think Gregory said he created an issue for it, but I looked at the queue and couldn't find it. That doesn't mean it's not there. I sometimes have a hard time finding things on GitHub. But yeah, there's a module called Save as Draft for Drupal 7 that I thought might fit really nicely with the preview feature. So if we wanted to do sort of an editorial improvement, it might work well. And then we'd also been talking about workflow states in the last release because we're looking at this scheduling feature we just added. And so if we wanted to figure out how to solve our workflow problems, Save as Draft might be part of that, as well as the next one is also add better workflow handling is related to Save as Draft too. And I'm pretty sure Gregory has some issues on all of these things, but I couldn't find them. So I don't know if we need to create new issues or dig up. There's probably a meta somewhere about workflow or several metas about workflow. And we just need to figure out which one of those we should be looking at. Here we go.
I found it. 1382.
Yes.
Import and merge save draft in core. Oh, this is interesting. This is actually less. This is actually more like a user interface switch around rather than adding real substantial functionality. It looks like, although really, the suggestion in this one is to use the drop button capabilities, like to change the save button. And my most recent comment on this was about a month ago, saying that Drupal 8 actually removed that feature from Drupal 8 because people couldn't figure out how to publish and unpublish content. So I don't know. I feel like this particular issue we might consider, like, maybe we should just close this one as won't fix, considering we already had a really large beta test of Drupal users that all decided that that was kind of a bad idea. Like certain things that might sound good in concept, but when they met reality, it wasn't so great, like overlay. But anyway, you're right that there's, or maybe I should say Gregory is right, that there's potential for doing a lot of work in the workflow area, especially now that we have scheduling, figuring out how scheduling and publishing and saving as drafts or previews, all of these things they're interconnected. So there are opportunities here to improve our implementations. Oh, interesting. So the contrib module, thanks Olaf for providing these links. There's a contrib module called Save Draft that Lauren put together, it looks like. And it looks like what it does is when you schedule your content or mark it unpublished or published, like when you check those options for scheduling or for publishing, it changes the label of the button on the page to make it clear what the action is that you're actually doing. So that's an interesting concept where instead, like right now, we just have the button just says save, but this would change the button label, it looks like, to match the action. So if you scheduled it, it would say schedule publication, it looks like. If you had it unpublished, it would be save as draft. And I imagine if you published it, it would say the word publish. So, or save if you were doing an update, but probably publish if you were creating a new piece of content. Or
I think that would be a great usability improvement in general to get that feature in. So
yeah, I think that's much more reasonable. Like just making the button say what the button is doing, rather than attempting to do something crazy like the drop button, which actually has a pretty substantial like UX impact. Yeah, I would be happy with hijacking that issue 1383 to take on that purpose instead of like, let's use the drop button like Drupal 8, instead be the issue that is like, let's use this contrib module or this functionality from this contrib module into core. Jen just closed the issue.
I'll reopen it.
Okay, making a new issue might be even better, though. I mean, that one's already got some noise on it. Oh, did you already?
Okay. All right, I'll make a new issue.
Okay. Okay. All right, and then lastly, for items for 1.11, we'd still like to include this functionality that was bumped from 1.10, which is issue 704, which is the config translation issue. That issue still hasn't really seen any progress, but I'm hopefully by putting it in these agendas, hopefully we'll get a pickup in interest to continue that implementation. It would be really excellent to have config translation to round out the translation improvements that we made in 1.10. We had 3 items that we were angling for 1.10: menu translation improvements, block translation, and config translation. At least we got menus and blocks completed and in core, which is great. But issue 704 would take us kind of the next level, that it would allow us to track translatable strings that are stored in configuration files. It actually doesn't add new functionality so much, because you can already fully translate Backdrop, including the strings that are in configuration files. It's just that Backdrop can't accurately identify which strings need to be translated in those configuration files. So it makes it so that sites like or tools like our localization website don't include all of the strings that need to be translated, because it can't extract from the code base which strings are actually required to be translated. So issue 704 would fix that limitation in our translation extraction capabilities, and make it so that Backdrop could be fully translated, or we could pull out all of the strings that need to be translated more effectively. And lastly, there's always the 1.11 issue tracker milestone, which looks like currently contains about 10 more items that haven't been mentioned. I'll throw out here some things that also look like they're likely to be improved in the very near future. Opie has been doing an enormous amount of work on contact module. So contact module has been getting new settings, or is working towards having a settings form. Right now, there isn't really any settings for contact module other than the categories and where emails are sent to. But he's looking at adding things like controlling the threshold of like how frequently people can send, because there is that like a flood control in Backdrop, but it's not exposed through the user interface. Also making it so that you can disable the send yourself a send yourself an email, send yourself a copy checkbox. So increasing the configurability of the contact module. Those are coming along quickly, and we'll probably see those in 1.11. And HerbDuel has been doing work regarding user registration and user login. Similar, adding options for flood control, or exposing the options for flood control to the user interface. And also, it looks like we'll probably have the login settings separated from the rest of the user account settings, which I feel like probably would be a good thing, because like as we get more options controlling how a user logs in and how they create an account, like that user account settings page is already overwhelmingly long, including all the registration emails and everything like that. So, so those are some other things that we're looking at that we'll likely see in 1.11. Let's see. Backdrop for good, no update necessary. Oh, well, Olaf is here. Olaf, are you working with Jeff on the Backdrop for Good project?
I used to work with him, but lately we didn't.
Okay. Well, we'll skip the update there, and that goes into just general discussion. Do you guys have anything that you guys would like to discuss now on the air, or anything that we'd like to add to the agenda for next week?
Jen, did you want to do the install profile discussion now, or?
Sure. So this came from, I think, 2 weeks ago. It was kind of a discussion that I think we were having in Gitter or something. We thought it might be better to have it face-to-face. Just sort of to, we know that install profiles are not everything everyone wants out of them. And so we were talking about trying to come up with some kind of consensus on what we want, what tools we want for Backdrop in the future and how they should work. Obviously, we have install profiles in Core. There are people who have install profiles in Drupal, and I think that we can't remove those in the Wanda X cycle, but we can start thinking about what we would rather have instead and start building new things that we would prefer. And Mike had a couple of ideas about that. We had, ideas a ways back about, a features module for Backdrop and what that would be in a world of config, how to package things together, whether they should be run an installation or, how do you remove them later, whether they could be something you could import to an existing site if you wanted to add a new section, just a whole bunch of questions, and how the things, if it is something like a collection of modules and a collection of configurations, how they get bundled and distributed. In the Drupal distributions, using Drush Makefiles is sort of a very special case solution that we had to come up with in Drupal because there wasn't anything else. But now that we live in this time of the Composer, we could just have some kind of a Composer file that would list the dependencies and things that were needed. Mike says no.
we have Core able to download projects now. So I mean, if we had, the thing that I'm advocating for is that we make install profiles just install. Right now, they sort of install and then hang around doing stuff, and you can have modules in them and themes included in them and stuff like that, and it's sort of like this whole other thing. And I'm thinking that we switch install profiles to just install. It has an info file, it has a bunch of dependencies that either it can download independently, or you can use the auto download to download all of them, or say you need to install these before running the profile, and then it just installs imports a bunch of configuration and runs an install function that just makes any changes that needs to happen. And then once it's done, it goes away because it's already done everything it needs to do.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I like that idea. I was thinking along the same lines, but something like right now, when you do a config imports aren't smart enough right now to be able to enable modules, let alone download them. But it's pretty easy to identify what modules provide what config files because they're all namespaced. We could potentially make it so that importing a config.
They're not all namespace though. I mean, there's plenty of modules that provide views config that aren't from the views module. I think we talked about at one point adding an underscore module key into all config files so that we would know which module provided them. And I think there's an issue for that. But right now, a bunch of kind of ambiguous.
Yeah, it wouldn't be foolproof, but most modules also have at least one config file. It's pretty uncommon to have a module that just has views config files and no other ones. So there would be at least one config file usually that would indicate this module is required. But anyway, where I was heading with that is importing config could download modules.
We can put it in the info file, just how we deal with module dependencies right now. We have dependencies listed in the info files, and they don't turn on until the dependencies are there. And we could just do the same thing with the install profile, where it has a bunch of dependencies, and when you go to run it, it either says they're there, or it says would you like us to automatically download it, where it uses the project browser downloader. Or it says install these modules before running the install profile. Yeah. So I think just having them in the info file as dependencies are fine. I think it probably already supports those. I think I think if we have profiles and they have an info file, I think it already has dependencies in it, but just making sure that's there. And like, I just think this might not even be really a technical thing. It might just be more of a, this is the direction we're going. From now on, don't put modules and themes into your install profile. Instead, publish them in Contrib and have it pull it in.
Yeah, well, that's always been a mess as long as profiles have existed anyway, that the copy that's in your profiles module directory versus the one that's in the normal modules directory, it's a big mess. Like, so I would, absolutely be in favor of deprecating that concept of a profile also containing modules.
Yeah, so it's like, so install profiles, install a bunch of stuff. And that's it. You can even have it, so you could run an install profile on an already, installed site, and it can just set up some more stuff.
Oh, interesting.
There's possibilities like that, where it doesn't, you can do it like, after the fact, like if you want to like it adds features to your site. I know last time I talked to Jen, she was worried about being able to roll back that stuff. So I don't know.
Yeah, that doesn't sound very feasible.
But we don't have to start. We can start with fresh sites that run an install profile that just installs a bunch of stuff, adds some configuration, and then goes away.
Yeah, I think the goes away problem will help, because the reason that right now people get stuck without being able to get out of their install profiles is because that code is still there and still running. But if all it is a script that it runs and deletes itself like a config does on a config sync, then you don't have a remaining dependency, and you can remove that module later.
Wait, what? Like, yes, I think I'm agreeing with you.
I mean, it would just be like you built a site manually. Instead of building it manually, you ran a script to do it.
It's more like a recipe where it just like, downloads all the ingredients and chops them up and cooks them for you and serves them.
Right.
You can take things off your plate then if you don't like the carrots, but your soup might still taste like carrots even though you took the carrots out. Yeah, but people shouldn't be that picky. Anyway, so that's what I'm sort of imagining. Like, I forget what I've posted about this, because I've posted, I think, in several different places, but I think we sort of need we need to sort of agree on a direction to go with it. And I think I have like some principles that I'd like to propose along these lines about how the install profile should just be for installing.
Yeah. I like the way this sounds. This sounds simple.
We can add any additional functionality we need to get this done. Like, I don't think we have any sort of config import working with install profiles, do we?
Well, modules, when they're enabled, do import their default config. Yeah, okay. So if your install file installs a module, that's how the config is handled.
It does look like profiles do support config import. Like they have a config directory, just like modules do, because internally modules and install profiles are actually considered the same thing, which is a little bit weird. But that's like they have .info files that specify dependencies, and they have install files that do hook install, and they have config files that get imported automatically when they're turned on for the first time.
Great.
So all the pieces are kind of there, except for turning itself off after it's been turned on.
Yeah, we just have to sort of formulate how these things are being used, and then all the other stuff, like including modules and themes inside of it, can be deprecated in Backdrop too. But it's more of like telling people how to do it. I would say install profiles are just for installing. I think we still need to figure out a bunch of other stuff, like what if you want a feature that then gets updated or runs on an ongoing basis, or a distribution. Like, this wouldn't necessarily handle all those cases, but they could be handled some other way. I'd say install profiles just for installing your recipe on your site.
Yeah, I don't see any blocker implementing this as a contrib module, at least, to beta test it. Like, I mean, it could be like a standalone module that basically just reads what profiles you have and lets you execute any profile arbitrarily. Like, I just want to run this profile, and all that it does is it just runs the install process on that profile, and then it's done. Like that
before it exists.
Oh, well, I was thinking on an existing site, like once the site's already built, like it would be a user interface for just running install profiles.
You could do that. that's good for something in Contrib. So people who do want to run install profiles after the fact can do it.
Yeah.
For core, like the other thing I was saying is that there's another ticket where I was basically saying that our default install profile that sets up posts and pages and stuff like that it's not really anyone's use case. Like I don't think anyone opens a backdrop site and says, oh, it has all the pieces I need, I'm just going to start using it. Like the install profile we have does some stuff, but it's not really for anyone. So if we were to come up with a couple of install profiles for core, like a blog or a calendar or something like that, and then so when people are installing backdrop, they have a few different choices of install profiles that are actually geared towards things. The blog one being most important, because if we want to do any sort of WordPress import, if we had an install profile that mimics WordPress, then you could sort of install a WordPress version of backdrop on install and then just import the data.
I would love it if we could make our default profile the WordPress blog profile. So I think that I like where you're going with that, Mike, but I'd like to see the other profiles exist in Contrib first, and then we move them to the core later. But if we can work on making our default profile that one that you're talking about, I think that would get us a long way.
Yeah, our objective when we did the things like we renamed page and post to mimic WordPress, and doing things like the configuration of Path Auto on those content types, and the way that the homepage is a river of news. The concept that we have is that the default install profile should be the blog, because that's about the only common thing that we can kind of assume that most sites are going to have. They'll probably extend on top of that quite a bit, but the default install situation is supposed to be the blog.
I think the other one that could be, yes, I think if we continue to refine our current install profile, maybe just to make it as WordPressy as possible, blocks and everything, just so we can have a data import that just sets up everything that's already in a WordPress blog.
Yeah.
That's something. I think the other core install profile we could have is a portfolio site, and sort of compete with sort of the Squarespaces. If people need to set up a portfolio site, they could download Backdrop and it would have like a list of projects or something, and
Yeah. So not to dampen this too much, but I like to. I'm nervous about adding more options to the installer. I've like the time zone related thing. Like I'm trying to remove things from the installer as much as possible, just because it speeds the initial first impression. It's like, oh, this thing is really simple because I just clicked the button and it was installed. Like that's, I'd like to see as few questions as possible during the installation process, and something like that is like, how would you like to set this up, can really be stress inducing for an evaluator, because they're like, oh my God, there's this giant decision that is the first thing that's being asked of me. And how do I change this decision later is always a big question. And even if we say you can change this later, like how do you change it later? Like it's always difficult to describe. But for something like profile or portfolio, I mean, what I would like to see as an end user is I install Backdrop. It doesn't present me with functionality questions. It just installs. And then when I'm like, oh, I want a portfolio, I go to the install modules page and I type in portfolio, and then I click a button, and then my portfolio is set up. Like that's kind of what you're saying. Like functionality wise, it might be an install profile that runs later, but it would be done
But then you already have all the blogs. Like we don't have a minimal install, so then we'd have all the blog stuff in there, and what would happen to it?
Well, it's still there, right? Because what you get is blog plus profile.
Yeah, but what happens? Because if we're changing the layouts and stuff like that to have the blog tags and stuff in the sidebar and things, and try to WordPress it up as much as possible, then it's what happens to that? I'm just saying that's then you.
Anyway.
Anyway.
I mean, I think it would be the same as a config sync, right? Where it would just delete what was the layout configurations that were there before and replace them with the new ones.
Yeah, but if we're talking about installing on top of a thing, then it could be, then we're getting a sort of more destructive territory, where it's destroying existing things.
Yeah.
Where
I think
install
in-
profiles should probably just install new things and not worry about existing things. So
Right. I mean, I think let's not worry too much about install profiles right now because nobody knows how to use them. I think like in terms of that, like let's make a decision before we install the software. It's just not really a thing. I think if we can focus on like doing what you said about making default backdrop be as much like WordPress, that's going to be a big win. And people don't have a problem with WordPress being like too feature rich. Like if you want to make a portfolio of a WordPress site, you start with WordPress and you add stuff to it. And I think that's kind of the same model we should use in Backdrop. Let's start with whatever and add stuff to it. And if the things we end up adding to it, if those are install profiles or whatever they end up being, end up like overriding your homepage layout with a different layout, that's fine. Because that's a decision somebody made. Like I want a portfolio site, click the button, and now you have a portfolio site. And as long as there's a way for them to say, I want my blog site back, go and install whatever, overwrite again. Like we can overwrite as many times as we want. And for sure, any customizations are going to be lost. But that's kind of, you know, that would be true if you uninstalled a module or if you know, that's just kind of the way it works.
okay, I mean, this is just a discussion on things. I mean, it sounds like, yeah, I just think that we should sort of codify what we're looking for, because if people do start building distributions or features and stuff like that, and they try to use install profiles the way they've traditionally been used, then it could be problematic down the line. So it's sort of like, I think we should come up with guidelines for how install profiles are supposed to work, and then maybe discuss how features or distributions are supposed to work in the future.
Yeah, and I like what you're both saying about the way install profiles could work. I think that sounds way saner than anything we're doing now. Yeah. And I think if we want to set up like best practices for install profiles and then even rework the way Core is using its profiles to try and follow those best practices, that's all something we can do in the 1.x cycle. And if we have contrib profiles that we can use, like we want one for.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing then. Yeah, that's the other thing then, is we would have more profiles on backdrop.org as something that can be downloaded, just like, you know, modules and features. Like, you know, we could have like, you know, your portfolio install profile and other things that we just need to figure out. We just need to figure out a way to make it easy for people who want to have a portfolio site to install Backdrop and get it, and not have to actually drag things to their download the actual code and install it. We need to figure out some way to get it to download the install profile automatically and run.
Right. Yeah. And right now we don't have the capability even in the installer to handle dependencies. Like if a dependency is specified, it downloads it first and then it says, oh, you also need to install these things, which is a little bit cumbersome. Like it would be awesome if it could figure out, like, I want to install, I don't know, some web form related module. Like it would automatically know, it would have to download it, or maybe backdropcms.org would have to start knowing about dependencies, download it, and then say, oh, I also need to download these things in order to make that.
So we're not doing that for modules now at all?
No. Right now you need to know what the dependencies are. And
it sounds like step one to figure out.
Right. And that particular problem is a little bit difficult because some projects contain multiple modules that have optional dependencies. And so it's not necessarily the case that you should download all of the possible dependencies for all of the modules within a single project. Like that's not, it's like sometimes, you know, a module might provide integration with 4 other modules. Like a module might have like rules integration that is a separate module that depends on rules module, but you don't necessarily need to turn that module on, and you don't need rules. So
do we have a discussion about this already or not?
No, I don't think so. Right now, it's just a known thing that when you download modules, it doesn't download the dependencies. But when you go to turn them on, it'll say, hey, you need these extra modules before you can proceed.
All right, I have to go take the dog to the vet, but I will create that issue to talk about this if someone else doesn't.
Yeah, and also, I totally think we should proceed with deprecate the functionality for modules to be in profiles.
Yeah.
I think that we can like just discuss how to deprecate it and then make that be a thing like without any blocking whatsoever. Because I think just about everybody is going to be on the same page there, that holding your modules in the modules directory is a much saner thing to do than put it in the profiles directory.
Yeah.
All right, cool. I think we have made a little bit of progress here, so go us.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining the meeting today. Thank you to our YouTube watchers out there. Thank you to the new dog for providing entertainment.
No, she's asleep.
And okay. Well, thank you everybody, and we'll catch you guys next week. See you online.
Bye.